it was Keats, but it may have been Tennyson. But somebody described the poet as a person who stands upon a promontory and descries the future. And then poetry went modern and academic and lowercase, and poets began to experiment with type fonts and other stuff, and somehow got detached and somehow, well, lost their audience. Lately, there's a new fashion in the world, and that is to create Poets Laureate again for nations, and in our case, luckily, for a city, the city of Toronto. And our Poet Laureate is an activist, a poet, and a priest, and indeed his name is Pier Giorgio Di Cicco. To say the words is to become a poet. Pier Giorgio.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, there I am. Can you hear me? Good. I think he's looking for a gig as the next Poet Laureate. I think he's going there, you know. And geez, I don't know if any of you really, how many of you knew that there was a Poet Laureate in Toronto. City Hall sometimes doesn't know. My diversity outfit here. My diversity outfit. And if I take it off, then what's left? I'm a poet, and what's a poet's outfit? I teach at the University of Toronto. What's the professor's outfit? I was born in Italy, so I'm Italian. Another tag. I'm branded all over the place. And I grew up in Quebec. Oh, more culture. And then Baltimore, more cultural. I'm tetracultural. I'm many-cultural. I'm an expert in culture. Came to Canada. Does that make me Italian-Canadian, Italian-American-Canadian? Very confusing. Lucky I came to Toronto, where we brand ourselves with diversities of all kinds, and I can get away with anything. But it is confusing and very challenging, and I ask myself if that is enough and what is left after all the branding is over. How do you identify with me? How do you recognize me? How do I recognize you, minus the branding? Or do we keep putting on different hats by which to identify each other? Is that enough for diversity in the future? Designer labels. Maybe that's what ideologies are, designer labels. Away, abstracted from the beliefs that gave them genesis. And the beliefs that gave us genesis, culture, I doubt that genesis, that culture still exists. I'll be frank with you. I hope we have some arguments about this afterwards or discussions. I just don't think culture exists anymore. Multicultural doesn't mean anything to me, though I championed it, and many of us did for many, many years. But in a global environment in which ideas migrate to us before we have a chance to move or start the car, what does culture mean? I suspect that culture, the only mainstream culture, is the media. That's what I suspect. And that poses problems. But let me tell you the story of my life. You know, I hate stories. That's why I became a poet. No, it's true. I wanted to leapfrog to the timeless immediately. Sans narrative, sans that cheap concoction called Newtonian time, sans beginnings and endings. Do I need beginnings and endings to assure myself that I am real? Although I understand that the previous, this morning's panel was about illusion, I think the human heart has an appetite for what is real. But what is real? I mean, we need to apparently plant ourselves, tell each other that we belong. But maybe we don't. Maybe that's why people come to Toronto, so they don't have to belong so easily, so readily. You know, there's a lot of talk about the Toronto story. Stories are big now, because everyone supposes that by telling where they came from and where they're going, they'll recognize something in the chronology, in the trajectory. You know, when I lie awake at night and think of my life, I don't think of chronologies. I don't think any of us do. I think that we think of those moments of the timeless that were experienced in the temporal, if you will. But a moment of love, an epiphany, some kind of excitement, some kind of revelation, some kind of illumination, some kind of coming closer to the fire, not necessarily manifested by trajectory and movement. Ideas. Pick them up where you can, how you can. This is not my bioecology to be talking at this early hour in the day. I hate my argument as a poet, as a priest, as an Italian, as anyone. My opponent, my beef has always been against someone called Aristotle. Aristotle gave us the language that we try to wrestle ourselves out of, the dipotic, the dualism. I don't know, maybe Western philosophy starts with the light in the Mediterranean that is columnar. Did you ever see it? It's like heaven and earth. You've got two things. The light, as in other places, doesn't permeate, doesn't become diffuse, and thereby create a different metaphysic and a philosophy that is more holistic. The Mediterranean lends itself, the light, the drama, the theater of the light lends itself to dualism, and thus is created a language, a heritage, a legacy of dualism. Aristotle and his friends were bad at the timeless. They were very bad at the timeless. They didn't understand that human endeavor and enterprise doesn't always move from the rear, doesn't need engineering, engine, levers, strategies, the will, the deliberation to make, but it leads into all kinds of tyrannies, ideological, capitalistic, what have you. The mystics, the poets, the real physicists, the real philosophers have known a metaphysic different from the legacy that we wrestle ourselves out of. They have known that human beings are not so much propelled by event and causality as they are called. They are attracted to each other, to destiny, to the ineffable, to something that enlivens them, that is embedded in their teleology, what they were meant to be, how they were meant to be recognized, and how to flower in that recognition and have others flower in their recognition. That's some ideas. Do we want identity, really? No. What we really want is to be recognized and to recognize each other. And for that, we have to get past the brandings, the labels, the ideologies.
What happens every single time I come is that I run the full gamut emotionally. I mean, half the time I'm laughing uproariously, and the other, I'm in tears half the time, too, with some of these profound stories.
The story. I'm a priest. I was a successful writer by the age of 32. In 1982, I got it into my head that I needed to pray and explore the world of prayer and meditation. I went to a monastery and discovered the truly horrid ramifications of densification. I stayed there for a while. One thing led to another. I stopped writing. I stopped publishing for 15 years. And I didn't mind one bit. It was wonderful. I'm not one of those writers who is enthralled and captivated by the medium, who needs the medium like the right arm. Creativity in the human spirit is such that if you don't have this medium, you find another one. It must out, like the appetite for life. But I came out 5 years ago. I met a friend on the street who said, "Why don't you publish a book?" He was a friend. We had fun. I began writing again. I was living in the woods, and still do, keep a secret. That's why I can talk about the urban, because I live with chipmunks. And I became a poet laureate. They phoned up one day, said, "Do you want the job?" Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like fun. Haven't tried that. Another hat. And they said, "Come up with a legacy, a project." Oh, I had lovely people around me with lots of money who wanted to put up 50-foot high interactive poetry walls, more tourist destinations. What kind of gimmicks to move poetry along? Artists have not been lazy in this town or any town at furthering arts. Short of flying airplanes with banners saying, "Buy poetry," everything has been attempted. Take a poet to lunch. Be kind to poets, word on the street, buy books, everything's been tried. I said, no, I want something different. I want a legacy of ideas. What kind of ideas? What kind of ideas? And I gave a speech at City Council, and it was a simple thing. It was based on the obvious. I think years of being away from things and meditating had taught me the nature of reality. Reality was at the bottom of a river, and you obfuscated reality by stirring the still water with thoughts of one kind or another. And then you would have to re-coordinate, re-strategize, re-schematize to see through to the bottom of the river. But if you didn't stir, you could see to the bottom of the river. A phenomenology. You saw the relationship of objects. Translation, the obvious appears. And the obvious is a deteriorating commodity in today's time. I said some simple things, like, if we want to move the arts, the citizen has to become an artist and see their life as a canvas, whether it's family, community, commerce, what have you. Very simple. No secret. So many of us have been saying that for so very long. But I guess when cities become a little desperate in sustainability, they turn even to poets. And I said something like, Toronto has done everything, accomplished everything, except fall in love with itself. And that's still true. We're getting there. This used to be a no town. It's becoming a yes, but town. One day it may become a yes town. Little did I know that creativity was the craze. I'd come out of the woods to find that creativity was something everyone was interested in. The creative cities craze, championed by Richard Florida and his SWAT team of economic levers to make creative cities competitive with China that produced, and we had knowledge economies and had to have creative economies, and suddenly the words innovation and creativity came together, and suddenly I was on committees, federal, provincial, what have you, flying here and there, comparing best practices. I tagged along because maybe I knew something about creativity, what everyone was interested in as a resource. But they wanted innovation. And I said, fine, you can put that together with creativity if you want, but creativity is a mystery. It'll yield more than you bargained for if you yield to it, submit to it, don't lever it, don't strategize it, as Aristotle would have. It's a resource, a great resource. I said, you want a creative city? The citizen is by nature creative. Just let him or her be creative. The job of governance, take away those things that impede creativity. Take away the obstacles. Take away the boundary and the protocol that we are famous for increasingly in global cities because of global security issues. But Toronto always had a head start on boundary and protocol. In fact, this is the future global city. It's not that we're arriving to other cities. We are past that already. Because the challenges of how we can stay human in a boundary-conscious, proceduralized, regulated society, this is the laboratory for it. We have creative citizens now. For the first time in years, suddenly we have tides of electric young people who are bored and fed up with ideologies and the tensions of ideological wars. They have spontaneity, creativity, inventiveness. New Canadians are bringing a naturalness of spontaneity. There's a huge human resource waiting there. Do we dare to call it social capital? No, they are people. We mustn't forget that they are people. And the notion of creativity was in danger of becoming a discussion of social capital. I said, fine. If you want a creative people, teach them again to engage with the art of the random, the random. Teach them to trust. Because without trust, there is no creativity. You don't feel free to invent, to explore, to share, to collaborate if you don't trust the other person. And we have a conspiracy against trust now. In the world, it's coming, and it is here. Worried about security, we negotiate everything. You can't negotiate being in love. You can't negotiate creativity. You give it freely, the energism, the volunteering of one's energism, inspired out of oneself, not rallied out of oneself, not branded from the individual, but inspired. Inspired by what? What we can be inspired by also ties in with what gives us a collective sense of zeal, zest, identity, family. Do we want identity really? No. What we really want is to be recognized and to recognize each other. And for that, we have to get past the brandings, the labels, the ideologies, the various forms of pride in any form. Because the citizen is not looking for things to be proud of. The citizen is looking for things to rejoice in, to take joy in. In the light of the confusions, the diversity, the varying ideologies, the fracturing of agendas, human beings are withdrawing from each other.
I think it's awesome. It was, I had no idea what to expect, a vague idea of what to expect, but it was just one wonderful, delightful surprise, mind-expanding, heart-expanding experience after another.
Human nature is being revised. Sentimentally, we say it can never be revised. It is being revised. Because out of frustration and not being able to recognize the other person in that area of sacrifice, in the light of the confusions, the diversity, the varying ideologies, the fracturing of agendas, human beings are withdrawing from each other. One may not see that so much south of Eglinton. Drive around. There are two kinds of cities. There are two cities. One is the buzzing, dynamic city where we are, and we are prone to exchange. I don't know why. We're more fluid. I don't know what you want to call it. It's a phenomenon that happens in the city center. You go out there, Jane Jacobs called it the sullenness on people's faces, from her most recent book. The sullenness on people's faces. It's real. It's an index that has to be read, and it's as real as the Bohemian Index, as any kind of financial index. The GDP, it's there. I read it every day. As I drive down from the countryside, I see people's faces changing. Never mind the urban sprawl. I see the tides of sullenness changing, depending on whether people are free to encounter, to create, and to recognize each other. So I said, you're interested in city building? before you architect public space, architect the space between the citizens. Read the psychology of the citizen. Better yet, read the heart of the citizen. Not by what he or she wants, not by what he or she needs to buy, what you think they want, sometimes not even by what they say they want. But learn to read the desires, the deep primal desires of the human spirit. And those desires are for delight, creativity. You know where they meet, those desires? They meet in a moment of wonder. They meet in moments of wonder. When people are of different nationalities, different ideologies are looking at fireworks or something lovely, aesthetics aside, they put their differences aside for the moment and they share a moment of wonder together. And that wonder spills over and makes for trust and makes for reciprocity, makes for mutuality. I think governance and strategies for building cities has to look at fluff, what used to be called fluff, like wonder, and analyze the mechanics of what permits, allows, and brings the civic heart to the place of wonder. Build a city around that. Is that enough?